My name is Marcus Webb, I'm 28, and the last thing I remember believing with confidence is that roads are honest, painted lines, clear directions, a beginning and an end, unlike the forest that presses against Briar Hollow like a living bruise. I work nights maintaining the county's traffic cameras and emergency comm repeaters, the kind of practical job that keeps you alone for long stretches, driving service routes with a clipboard on the passenger seat, a tool bag rattling behind me, and my black hoodie with a faded logo pulled tight over my neck because the air out here bites harder after sundown. Dark jeans, steel-toe work boots, the same every night, because routine is a superstition when your world is mostly static and shadow. The first time the forest used my name, it didn't sound threatening. That's what people don't understand when they hear warning. They expect sirens and screaming. They don't expect familiarity. I was cutting along Old Quarry Road at 12:38 a.m., the road that skirts the tree line for 5 miles before it curls back toward town, and I just finished swapping a dead battery in a camera box when my radio spit a burst of static that didn't match the weather. I leaned into the driver's seat, turned the volume knob, and heard a low, distant laugh rolling from the trees like a group of men sharing a joke they didn't want anyone else to hear. I told myself it was hunters. I told myself it was teenagers. I told myself anything that let me keep my eyes on the road instead of the black between the trunks. Then the laughter stopped with a clean cut like someone had muted a track, and in the silence I heard it. Marcus. My name, spoken softly, from the right side of the road where there was nothing but brush and dead leaves. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't whispered like a threat. It was said like a friend leaning into the window of my truck. My hands tightened on the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, and the stupidest part is I almost answered, because my brain reached for the most normal explanation first. The second it registered as wrong, my stomach sank with a cold weight, and the hair along my arms lifted beneath the sleeves of my hoodie. I drove. I didn't stop. That became the first rule long before anyone printed rules. The next night I tried to avoid Old Quarry Road, but the service route demanded it. One of the tower relays was throwing intermittent faults, and the county didn't care about superstition. I parked at the pull-off near mile marker 9, headlights washing the pines in pale cones, and walked out with my tool bag swinging heavy at my side, boots crunching gravel trying to keep my breathing slow and unremarkable. The forest looked normal, which is how it tricks you. Normal trunks, normal dark, normal wind through needles. I reset a breaker, checked the battery voltage, scribbled notes on my clipboard, and for 10 minutes I convinced myself I'd imagined the voice the night before. Then my phone vibrated hard enough to rattle against my thigh. The screen flashed red. A tone sounded deep, vibrating, not the county weather chime, not anything I'd ever heard in training. Emergency alert. The words sat there stark and clean like they'd been typed by someone who didn't believe in panic. Do not stop your vehicle if the forest calls you by name. Do not exit your vehicle after dusk on Old Quarry Road. If you have already stopped, re-enter your vehicle immediately. Do not respond to voices laughter or radio transmissions originating from wooded areas. I stared at the screen and felt the world thin around me, like the air had been pulled tight. The alert had no agency logo, no county signature, no expiration. Just instructions, just certainty. Somewhere behind me, from inside the trees, laughter started again, closer now, layered, soft, and amused, as if it enjoyed watching me read. I turned slowly, tool bag hanging frozen at my side. I saw movement between trunks, not a deer, not a person, a low shape that shifted wrong like it couldn't decide whether it had 2 legs or 4. The laugh sharpened into something that sounded like it was being forced through a throat not built for it. Then, clear as a hand on my shoulder, the forest called again, "Marcus, come here." It was my own voice. Same cadence. Same tired rasp I get at the end of a shift. I felt my throat try to form an answer on reflex, and I bit down hard enough to taste blood. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I moved fast but controlled, boots sliding on gravel as I backed toward the truck, eyes fixed on the gap where the brush trembled. The shape edged forward into the thin spill of my headlights. It wasn't fully visible, more like a suggestion of limbs, long and jointed, bending at angles that made my brain flinch away from finishing the picture. 2 points reflected light back at me, Aishan, but too high for a coyote and too steady for anything that should be alive. The thing laughed again, and the sound had layers now, my voice and another male voice and another, stacked like recordings playing out of sync. I reached the driver's door, grabbed the handle, and in that same instant the radio mounted on my dash came to life by itself. Static. Then a calm voice, perfectly clear, using the tone of a dispatcher. "Marcus Webb, Unit Maintenance, please confirm your location." It sounded official. It sounded like work. It sounded like the exact kind of call that would make you stop and answer without thinking. I remembered the alert. I remembered the line that mattered most. Do not respond to radio transmissions originating from wooded areas. My hand shook as I yanked the door open and climbed in. The laughter outside rose, pleased, and the shape in the headlights leaned closer as if it could smell the decision. I slammed the door, locked it, shoved the truck into gear, and peeled out onto the road, tires spitting gravel. In my rearview mirror, I saw it move alongside the truck in the tree line, keeping pace without effort, sometimes dropping low, sometimes rising tall, its outline flickering between pines like a stuttering film. My phone buzzed once more with a final line appended beneath the alert, as if someone had realized too late they needed to say it out loud. If you stop, it will arrive at your window before you can lock the doors. I drove all the way to town with my jaw clenched and my eyes dry from not blinking, and when I finally hit the first streetlight and the tree line fell back into darkness, the laughter didn't fade like distance should have made it fade. It stayed right behind me, inside the cab now, soft and patient, like something had learned the shape of my silence and decided to sit in it. After that night, Old Quarry Road became a dead zone in everything but name, and the county pretended it was routine maintenance when they rerouted traffic and shut down half the cameras that faced the tree line. But I knew better because I was the one told to keep monitoring the remaining feeds alone. Overnight, sitting in the small concrete control room with its humming servers and stale coffee smell, my black hoodie zipped up tight like armor, while the forest loomed just beyond the reach of the lenses. The emergency alert never repeated publicly, but internal protocols started circulating in quiet, ugly ways. Printed sheets slid under doors, whispered instructions between supervisors who wouldn't meet your eyes, rules that read less like policy and more like survival folklore. Rule 1. If a vehicle stops on Old Quarry Road after dusk, do not dispatch assistance. Rule 2. If a radio transmission uses the operator's name without authentication, assume hostile origin. Rule 3. If auditory contact persists for more than 30 seconds, abandon the vehicle and flee toward populated lighting zones at maximum speed. The contradictions alone made my skin crawl. Stop, but don't stop. Stay, but don't answer. The rules were being written by people reacting, not controlling. The first confirmed disappearance happened 2 nights after my encounter. A delivery driver named Nolan Price, 24, last pinged just before midnight when his GPS froze on Old Quarry Road for 6 full minutes. His dashcam footage was recovered later, and I watched it because it was my job, even though every instinct told me not to. The video showed his truck idling on the shoulder, headlights pointed into the trees, Nolan laughing nervously and saying, all right, I hear you," like someone responding to a friend who wouldn't quit joking, and then his face changed. Not to fear at first, but confusion, like he was trying to reconcile a voice he recognized with a place it didn't belong. The audio picked up laughter outside the cab, dozens of voices overlapping, some deep, some young, some wrong in ways the human ear isn't meant to catalog, and then one voice cut through cleanly, using Nolan's own tone, saying, "Just open the window." The footage ended when something struck the driver's side door hard enough to rock the truck, and Nolan screamed once before the camera went dark. They found the truck at dawn, door closed, keys still in the ignition. No blood, no tracks leading away, only long drag marks circling the vehicle like something had paced it for hours, listening. After that, the forest started calling more often and not just on Old Quarry Road. Calls came in from the southern bypass, from the service lane near the water plant, always the same pattern. Laughter first, then a single voice isolating itself from the rest, choosing a name, choosing a tone that felt safe. I heard it myself through the monitors, through the radio static, through the walls of the control room late at night when everything else went quiet. It used voices of men who were still alive, voices of men already missing, and once memorably, it used the voice of my supervisor, asking me if I could step outside for a second because there was a problem with the generator. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I sat there sweating through my hoodie, counting my breaths, while the voice repeated itself with tiny variations, adjusting cadence, softening consonants, learning how to sound concerned instead of authoritative. The first direct visual encounter on record happened at 3:11 a.m. on a grainy traffic camera feed that wasn't supposed to be active anymore. And when it popped up on my screen, I felt my stomach drop so hard it was like missing a step in the dark. A shape emerged from the trees into the edge of the road, tall but hunched, its silhouette flickering as if the camera couldn't agree on how many limbs it had. It stood there for a full 10 seconds unmoving, then turned its head toward the camera in one smooth, wrong motion and smiled. I know it smiled because the mouth stretched wide, far wider than anatomy should allow, and even in black and white night vision I could see too many teeth, uniform and pale, catching the infrared like glass. The audio came through a heartbeat later, soft laughter, almost shy, followed by my name spoken gently, like an invitation. I killed the feed and logged a signal fault, hands shaking so badly I had to type twice to get the words right. That same night, a state trooper named Daniel Hurst broke Rule 2. He radioed in that he was being followed along Old Quarry Road by someone running in the trees. And when dispatch tried to keep him talking, the radio cut in with Daniel's own voice, calm and steady, saying, "It's okay, I pulled over, I can see them now." That was the last transmission. His cruiser was found parked neatly at the shoulder, hazard lights on, driver's door locked from the inside. No sign of Daniel, no footprints leading away. Just deep impressions in the dirt beside the road, like something had stood there upright for a long time, waiting for him to finish speaking. After Hearst, the rules changed again, harsher, more desperate. No more verbal check-ins after dusk. No more names spoken over the radio unless absolutely necessary. If a call came in from Old Quarry Road, it was logged and ignored. Let the forest have the road, someone high up decided. It wasn't worth the cost. The thing they didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to understand, was that the forest wasn't bound by the road anymore. I learned that when it followed me home. It started subtle, laughter drifting through my open truck window even after I'd left the tree line behind. My name murmured from between houses as I drove through quiet residential streets, always just out of sight. Then it escalated. One night I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine running because I could hear it laughing softly from the far end of the block, voices overlapping, practicing the rhythm of my breathing. And when I finally shut the engine off, the sound moved closer, matching my steps as I walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't run. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, locked it behind me, and sat in the brightest room until dawn like the rules said, while something paced the sidewalk outside, laughing in my voice in Nolan's and Hurst's, testing which one made my pulse spike the hardest. By morning it was gone, leaving nothing behind but the certainty that the rules weren't protection, they were delay, and whatever lived in the forest wasn't just calling vehicles anymore. It was learning where we lived. I didn't plan on finding the truth, because people like me don't get invited into rooms where the truth lives. But once the forest started following me past the roads and into town, once it learned the shape of my routine and the sound of my silence, I knew guessing would get me killed faster than knowing. The county control room had an old terminal no one used anymore, a dusty thing shoved into the corner under a pile of outdated manuals, still logged into a legacy system that predated the current emergency network. And at 1:42 a.m. on a night when the laughter stayed far enough away to let me think, I booted it up and started digging. What I found wasn't hidden behind passwords so much as buried under boredom. Endless PDFs, scanned memos, mislabeled folders that assumed no one would ever care enough to read them. The project name appeared first in a footer, small and easy to miss. Project HOLLOWCALL. It dated back 9 years, long before the road closures, long before anyone admitted Old Quarry Road was dangerous. The opening report described auditory anomalies originating from forested regions with high limestone density, noting that echoes in certain areas didn't decay normally, that recorded sounds sometimes replayed themselves hours later without a source. At first it was framed as an acoustic curiosity, a geological fluke. Then came the animal reports: wolves behaving strangely, deer avoiding entire sections of forest, scavengers found dead without injury, mouths open, vocal cords ruptured. The language shifted after that. Anomaly, entity, adaptive response. One file included still images pulled from traffic cameras and hunting trail cams, grainy and blurred, but clear enough to show shapes that didn't belong: tall, emaciated forms pacing roads just beyond headlight reach, limbs bending backward, heads carried too low or too high depending on the frame, mouths always open. Someone had written a note across one image in red pen: "It listens before it moves." Another document, classified higher than the rest, explained why names mattered. According to the researchers, the entities, plural, always plural, didn't simply mimic sound, they mapped identity through repetition. A name spoken often enough, especially in isolation or stress, created what they called a vocal anchor, a pattern the entities could lock onto and refine. Vehicles were ideal: radios, hands-free calls, drivers talking to themselves. Once an anchor was strong enough, the entity could project the voice back with increasing accuracy, using it to induce compliance. The phrase that made my stomach drop was buried halfway through a paragraph: "Subjects exhibit a statistically significant tendency to stop vehicles when addressed by name in familiar vocal patterns." They weren't guessing. They were testing. And people were failing. The next section explained containment, or what passed for it. Roads like Old Quarry were designated harvest corridors, areas where exposure could be monitored and losses controlled. Losses. That word showed up a lot. The recommendation from one oversight committee was blunt: do not evacuate population centers. Controlled exposure provides better data and limits spread. Another memo argued that once an entity had learned enough voices, it could be guided, redirected, used as a deterrent against encroachment in other regions. The forest wasn't just a problem. It was a resource that needed management. My name appeared in the logs more times than I liked. Maintenance technician, night shift. High exposure due to solo driving and frequent radio use. One analyst noted that my compliance profile was promising because I hadn't stopped when first addressed. Another suggested continued observation to see how long resistance could be maintained once the entity transitioned from roadway contact to residential proximity. I sat there staring at the screen, hoodie pulled tight around me, realizing with a sick clarity that the rules weren't designed to save us. They were designed to slow the learning curve just enough to keep the entities predictable. That was when the secure channel pinged. A message window opened on its own. No sender ID, just text appearing line by line as if typed slowly. "Marcus Webb, we know you've accessed restricted material." I didn't reply. I didn't even touch the keyboard. Another line appeared: "Do not be alarmed. You are not in trouble." That was almost worse. The message continued, explaining in neutral, careful language that Project HOLLOWCALL was entering a new phase, that uncontrolled spread of mimicry was suboptimal, and that individuals like me, high-resistance subjects, were valuable. They wanted me to stay where I was, to keep driving my routes, to keep not answering. "Your behavior provides critical contrast data," the message read. Outside the control room, somewhere beyond the concrete walls, laughter drifted faintly through the night, closer than it should have been, soft and patient, like it already knew I was reading about it. The message ended with a line that felt less like instruction and more like a promise: "Do not stop your vehicle. We are still learning how close it can get before you do." The screen went blank. At the same moment, Every forest-facing camera feed lit up at once. Dozens of images showed the same thing from different angles: the road, the tree line, and a tall shape standing just beyond the asphalt facing the town. It lifted its head slowly, deliberately, and even without audio I knew it was laughing. I logged out, powered the terminal down, and sat there in the hum of the servers, understanding that the forest didn't need permission anymore. It had data. It had patience. And it knew my name well enough now that it didn't have to shout it. The escape plan wasn't heroic or clever. It was ugly and desperate and built on the single assumption that if Project HOLLOWCALL was still observing me, then the forest was too, and neither of them expected me to break pattern at the same time. I waited 3 nights after reading the files, 3 nights of driving my usual routes, logging my usual maintenance checks, letting the laughter pace me without reacting, letting it think I was predictable, compliant in my resistance. I wore the same black hoodie, the same dark jeans, the same steel-toe boots, spoke into the radio only when absolutely required, and every night the voices grew closer, clearer, more confident, slipping my name into casual phrases like it belonged there. On the 4th night I loaded my truck differently, heavier in the back, tools arranged not for work but for speed, and instead of turning off Old Quarry Road like the revised routes demanded, I drove straight toward it at 1:09 a.m. when the cameras were known to cycle. The emergency alert hit my phone the second my tires crossed the invisible boundary, the same deep vibrating tone, the same blunt instruction: do not stop your vehicle. This time there was an addition at the bottom, smaller text: rushed, federal response in progress. That was the lie. The forest was quiet for nearly a mile, no laughter, no movement, just my headlights cutting a tunnel through trees that leaned in like they were listening. I almost believed I'd miscalculated. Then my radio clicked on by itself. No static this time. My own voice came through clean and calm, saying, "Marcus, slow down, there's something in the road." I felt my foot twitch toward the brake on reflex and forced it down harder on the gas instead. Engine roaring as shapes burst from the tree line, tall and wrong, running upright for a few steps before dropping low, matching my speed without effort. Laughter exploded around me. Not playful now, but irritated, layered voices overlapping as if arguing over which one should speak next. One of them moved closer than the others, pacing the driver's side, its outline briefly visible in the wash of my headlights, skin stretched tight over bone, mouth open in a wide, wet grin that never closed. It spoke again in my voice, sharper now: "You're going to crash." Ahead, the sabotage point came into view, the old research access gate half hidden by brush, the one place the files said still fed power to the underground listening array. I didn't slow. I hit the gate hard enough to shear the lock, metal screaming as it bent inward, and tore down the dirt track beyond it with the forest erupting behind me, bodies crashing through undergrowth, laughter turning feral. I skidded to a stop at the generator shed only because I had to, slamming the truck into park and jumping out before my brain could argue, boots hitting mud as something heavy slammed into the tailgate. I yanked the shed door open and dove inside, the smell of oil and ozone burning my nose, and ripped open the main panel with shaking hands. The laughter pressed in from all sides now, voices shouting my name, pleading, threatening, laughing all at once as shadows moved against the thin walls. A limb punched through the corrugated metal near my head, jointed wrong, fingers too long, scraping blindly as if tasting the air. I slammed the breaker down. The generator screamed, lights flaring white-hot, and for a split second the laughter fractured, voices slipping out of sync, some cutting off entirely. I ran. I didn't look back as the shed detonated behind me, a concussive wave throwing me forward into the mud, ears ringing, vision blurring as the forest lit up in a brief, terrible flash that showed dozens of them converging at once. Something tackled me from the side before I could get up, slamming me into the ground, breath knocked from my lungs as weight pinned my chest. I smelled it then, rot and copper, felt hot breath on my neck as the thing leaned close, studying me. Its mouth opened wider than should have been possible, and in my own calm voice it said, "You should have stopped." I screamed, raw and involuntary, and the thing laughed in delight, tightening its grip, claws digging in. Gunshots cracked the night, sharp and panicked, and the weight lifted suddenly as a man I recognized only vaguely. One of the federal drivers, named Ethan Rowe, emptied his weapon at the shape, yelling at me to move. I rolled, staggered to my feet, and ran as the forest surged forward, laughter turning into chaos. Ethan's shouts cut short behind me, his voice instantly joining the chorus calling after me with perfect mimicry. I ran until pavement replaced dirt, until headlights blinded me and hands grabbed my arms, dragging me backward as my body finally gave out. When I came to, I was on the floor of an unmarked transport, wrists cuffed, an agent kneeling beside me telling me the sabotage had complicated the model, and that Briar Hollow was being evacuated under a cover story effective immediately. Through the open rear doors, I saw the tree line one last time, shapes standing just beyond the lights, heads tilted in unison, and one of them lifted its face and spoke my name softly, not angry, not playful, just certain, like it already knew where I was going next. 6 months after Briar Hollow was erased, I learned that distance doesn't mean escape. It just changes the acoustics, and I carry that understanding with me every night shift, every empty road, every place where the dark presses too close to the light. Officially, the town was lost to a hazardous infrastructure failure tied to illegal dumping, its roads sealed, its name scrubbed from maps, its people scattered with checks and paperwork, and instructions never to talk about what they heard after dark. Unofficially, Project HOLLOWCALL expanded. I know that because I still exist, which means they're still watching, still measuring resistance curves and compliance decay, still interested in how long a man can refuse to answer his own name when it's spoken with perfect familiarity. I live farther west now, in a place with fewer trees and longer highways, still doing maintenance work because it's the only skill set I trust, still wearing the same black hoodie, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots because changing them feels like tempting something to notice. The agent who debriefed me after the evacuation was careful with his words, telling me I was no longer a priority subject, which sounded reassuring until I realized it didn't mean I was safe, only that I was no longer the most useful. Ethan Rowe was listed as killed in the generator explosion, his body unrecovered, and I know exactly when his voice joined the forest because 2 weeks later, on a completely different road 3 counties away, I heard him laughing softly from the trees while I drove past without stopping. The pattern held. New forests, new roads, same rules. The government didn't shut the project down. They modularized it, broke it into regional task forces with different names and different budgets, all quietly sharing data on auditory compliance events and vehicle-based lure success rates. I saw enough leaked reports to understand the scope. Dozens of roads now flagged like old quarry had been. Dozens of names added to lists marked missing, assimilated, or useful. The thing they never wrote down, the part they avoided quantifying, was what it did to the ones who got away. I don't answer unknown calls anymore. I don't use my name unless I have to. I never leave the radio on longer than necessary, and when I drive at night, I keep my speed steady and my breathing irregular because consistency is an invitation. Twice now I've received emergency alerts on my phone that no one else around me got. The same deep vibrating tone, the same blunt phrasing, warning me not about a place but about a moment. Do not stop. Continue moving. Ignore all auditory contact. The last one came at 3:04 a.m. on a straight stretch of highway with no trees in sight, and I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because something had learned to issue warnings using the same language as fear. I don't know if the alerts are meant to help or to study how I react to them anymore. Sometimes, when I'm driving home before dawn and the world feels thin and unfinished, I hear laughter pacing me just beyond the reach of the headlights, not running, not chasing, just matching speed perfectly, and I know better now than to slow down or speed up because either choice is a response. The voices don't always sound like me anymore. They've gotten better at choosing. Friends I haven't spoken to in years. Coworkers from jobs I left behind. Men whose names only exist now in redacted reports. The forest doesn't need to be near for the effect to work. It only needs time and a quiet road. The last thing an agent ever told me before cutting contact completely was meant to sound like closure, his voice flat and tired as he said, "You did well not stopping, Marcus. Most people do." He didn't say what happens when I finally fail, or whether that failure would be logged as a death or a data point. I think about that when I pass mile markers at night, when the radio crackles just enough to suggest a voice might be forming, when I feel the urge to answer anything at all just to break the silence. The forest doesn't call everyone by name, not at first. It waits until the road is empty, until the driver is alone, until stopping feels polite instead of dangerous. And when it finally speaks, it already knows whether you're the kind of person who will slow down.